Right now, you slice your finger open on a kitchen knife and you barely react. You rinse it, press on a plaster, dab on some antiseptic, and forget it ever happened. But for almost all of human history, that exact cut could have killed you. So how did anyone survive a serious wound at all? Not the blade, not the blood pouring out onto the ground. What killed people was something they could never see coming. There were no clean bandages. There was no medicine, no running water, no way to stop an infection once it took hold. A gash on the leg was not an inconvenience. It was a countdown, days of fever, swelling, and a slow, agonizing death, and everyone around you knew it. So a wounded person in the deep past should have been as good as gone, and yet buried in the ground, archaeologists keep finding something impossible: skeletons of people who were hurt in ways that should have finished them. People who lived, people who survived wounds that by every rule of the ancient world should have ended them right there in the dirt. Picture the world your ancestors actually lived in. Cold air off the rocks at dawn, wet grass, mud, sharpened stone, and the dried blood of yesterday's hunt still crusted on their hands. There is no hospital. There is no clean cloth, no boiled water, no shelf of ointments waiting on a wall. There is only the land, the cold, and whatever you can carry. Now watch Flint move through it. He is tracking a wounded animal across broken ground, spear low, every muscle tight, eyes locked on the trail. He steps onto a slab of loose stone and it shifts under his weight. His leg buckles and a jagged edge of rock tears a deep gash down his shin. He drops. Blood runs hot over cold skin and soaks into the dirt beneath him. He grips the wound with both hands and presses, hard, breathing fast, staring at it. And here's the terrible part. The bleeding is not the thing that will kill him. He can slow the bleeding. What he cannot see is what is already crawling into that open wound: the dirt on the stone, the filth on his own fingers, tiny living things pouring into his body through the torn skin, invisible, silent, and multiplying by the hour. Within days, that gash will turn hot and swollen, the fever will climb, and the countdown will begin. So what could a single frightened person possibly do against an enemy he could not even see? Here is what is really happening inside that wound. The bleeding slows, the skin stops weeping, and for a day or two it looks like Flint got lucky. But underneath the surface, an invisible battle is already lost. Bacteria from the stone, the soil, and his own skin have flooded the deep tissue, and there they double and double again, faster than his body can fight back. By the second morning, the edges of the gash turn an angry red. The skin around it swells tight and shiny. Touch it, and it is hot, far hotter than the rest of his leg. Watch Flint now. He limps to the riverbank, kneels and lowers the wound into the cold running water, gritting his teeth as it stings. He does not know what infection is, but he can feel that clean water helps, and still filth makes it worse. He tears a fistful of soft green leaves, crushes them between his palms until they weep a bitter juice, and presses that pulp against the torn skin. He binds it with a strip of hide and keeps the leg raised while he rests. And this is the part that should stop you. We picture Stone Age people as helpless in the face of a wound, doomed to rot and die in the dirt. But look closer at what Flint is doing, and a harder question rises. What if these people understood far more than we ever gave them credit for? What if washing a wound, choosing certain plants, and keeping filth out was not blind luck, but knowledge passed down and tested across 1,000 painful lifetimes? Because the evidence buried in the ground says exactly that. And that evidence is real, and it is older than almost anything you would expect. In the mountains of northern Iraq, in a place called Shanidar Cave, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a man who died tens of thousands of years ago. His body told an extraordinary story. He had a withered arm, a crushed eye socket, and a leg damaged so badly he must have limped in pain for years. Injuries that severe should have left him helpless, unable to hunt, unable to feed himself, a burden in a world that had no room for burdens. But his bones had healed. He lived for a long time after those wounds, which means one thing that changes everything. Someone stayed with him. Someone fed him, sheltered him, and carried him when he could not walk. The injured were not left in the dirt to die alone. They were nursed, protected, and kept alive by the people around them, and they were treated with what the land offered. Watch Flint gather sticky resin from the bark of a tree, warm it in his hands, and smear it across the raw edges of his wound, sealing it against the filth. Ancient healers used tree resins, pine tar, and the thick sweetness of wild honey on open injuries. And we now know these substances genuinely fight the tiny living things that cause infection. This was not superstition. This was medicine tested and remembered across countless lifetimes. But cleaning a cut and sealing a gash is one thing. It raises a far darker question. Could these people do more than treat a wound the world had given them? Could they take a blade of stone and cut into a living body on purpose? Now imagine the wound is worse than a torn shin. Imagine a bone snapped clean in half, the jagged ends grinding under the skin. Setting a break like that means gripping the limb and pulling the two halves apart until they line up again while the injured person screams. There is nothing to dull the pain. No drug to put someone under. No cup of anything strong enough to make them sleep through it. There is no metal blade honed to a fine edge, only chipped stone, sharp but rough. There is no needle and thread to close the flesh back together, no clamp to pinch a bleeding vessel shut. Watch a healer kneel over a broken leg with nothing but flakes of flint, strips of hide, and steady hands. Every choice is a knife's edge. Push too little and the bone knits back crooked and useless forever. Cut too deep and blood pours out faster than anyone can stop it, and the person is gone in minutes. And even if the break is set perfectly, the fever can still climb 3 days later and take them anyway. This is the ceiling of what anyone should have been able to do in the deep past. Cleaning a cut, sealing a gash, resetting a bone the body could still mostly heal on its own. To go further than that, to deliberately open a living body and cut a part of it away with stone and have that person survive should have been flatly impossible. For decades, that was exactly what experts believed. And then, on an island in Southeast Asia, someone dug into a cave floor and found something that shattered it completely. Here is what almost nobody tells you. In 2020, on the island of Borneo, in a cave called Liang Tabo, archaeologists dug into the floor and lifted out a human skeleton. When they studied it, they realized the lower left leg was missing, not shattered, not chewed off by an animal, not broken in a fall. It had been cleanly cut away, on purpose, with tools of stone. This was a child. Someone amputated a young person's lower leg, and the bone that was left behind tells us exactly what happened next. The end of it had healed over. New bone had grown, smoothed and rounded across the stump, the unmistakable sign of a body that lived on and kept growing. That child did not die on the day of the surgery. They did not die of blood loss, and they did not die of the fever that should have come days later. They survived for years, growing into a young adult, walking, being cared for, surrounded by people who kept them alive. And when researchers dated the remains, the numbers stopped them cold. This happened around 31,000 years ago. The findings published in the journal Nature in 2022 pushed the story of successful surgery back by tens of thousands of years. Sit with that for a second. This is surgery older than farming. Older than the first cities, older than writing, older than the wheel. Long before anyone planted a field or shaped a pot, someone knew where to cut, how to avoid the great vessels that would empty a body in minutes, how to keep the wound clean enough that it did not rot, and how to nurse a small child through the months of healing that followed. That is not luck. That is deep, hard-won knowledge of the human body carried in the minds of people we were taught to imagine as savages, and it forces a question straight back at you. Here is why that matters to you right now. That child survived for one reason, and it was not strength. Someone chose to keep them alive. Someone carried them, cleaned the wound day after day, and fed them through months when they could give nothing back. Think about what you actually do the moment a person you love gets hurt. You kneel down beside them, you press on the wound, you keep them warm, you refuse to leave until you know they are okay. Nobody taught you that. It rises up out of you before you can think. That reflex is not modern. It is the oldest medicine our kind has ever had. Every hospital, every surgeon, every clean bandage on a shelf is just the newest chapter of a very old refusal, the refusal to abandon someone who is hurt. For all those thousands of years, people did not survive because they were tough. They survived because a group of people around them decided again and again that they were worth saving. That is who your ancestors were. Not lonely survivors clawing through the dirt, but people who stayed. And survival, it turns out, was never only about who was strongest. It was about who refused to walk away. So the next time you flinch at a paper cut and reach for a bandage without a thought, remember what that simple reflex really is. It is 31,000 years old and older still. The wounded in the deep past did not survive because the world was gentle. They survived because their people refused to leave them behind. And that refusal, that stubborn will to keep each other alive, is the quiet engine underneath everything we became. But healing was only one of the great turning points. Because long before anyone set a bone or cleaned a wound, our ancestors were terrified of the one force that would one day save them. So what finally made ancient humans stop running from fire and start sitting down beside it in the dark? That story of the night they conquered their oldest fear is playing right now, waiting for you on your screen. Subscribe to Before History and keep uncovering the world you came from.